honored to have legendary CEO and presidential advisor Richard Parsons as our commencement speaker. He is, after all, one of us, a native Long Islander, born in Brooklyn and raised in a family of 5 children in South Ozone Park, Queens. He was shortlisted for admission to Princeton, but decided to attend the University of Hawaii. And though he wanted to be a fighter pilot, he followed his wife's advice and went to Albany Law School instead. His wife turned out to be right, of course. He graduated first in his class and got the highest score on his New York bar exam. Well, I was right. After law school, he joined then New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller's legal staff. He followed Governor Rockefeller to Washington when he became vice president, and he later served as senior White House aide under President Gerald Ford. He then joined a major New York City firm, Patterson, Belknap, Webb & Tyler, where he practiced with future New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and made partner in just 2 years. He was appointed CEO of Dime Savings Bank, one of the city's major thrift institutions, in 1988. In 1995, he became president of Time Warner, and in 2002, he was named Time Warner CEO, expertly guiding the company through the aftermath of its merger with AOL. He became chairman of the international financial services giant Citigroup in 2009, retiring in 2012. Despite his business obligations, he continued to answer when his country called. In 2001, he co-chaired President George W. Bush's Commission on the Future of Social Security, and in 2008, he was a member of President Barack Obama's Economic Advisory Team. But his professional life has not been all bottom line and high-stake politics. Since 2007, he's been the chairman of the board of the Jazz Foundation of America, a national nonprofit that provides emergency housing, financial assistance, and medical care, and creates performance opportunities for elder masters of jazz and blues. He's also chaired the New York City Partnership and took a leading role in the campaign to save Harlem's legendary Apollo Theater, where he's now chairman of the board. His old company, Time Warner, renamed its more than 30-year tradition of Employee Community Service Awards in his honor, recognizing him as, quote, a national role model for civic and community service. And last May, he was the go-to guy for the National Basketball Association, who named him interim CEO of the Los Angeles Clippers, preserving the franchise in the wake of the racial remarks controversy sparked by former owner Donald Sterling. Still, the secret of his success comes back to South Ozone Park, Queens. He once told an interviewer, "I was a middle child. I grew up with 3 sisters and a brother. You know what that means? Everybody is constantly fighting with everybody, and you're in the middle of a storm trying to make peace. That is your life, making everybody work and play well together." We could not be more honored and delighted to have my friend Richard Parsons with us today to share words of wisdom and to welcome our graduates to the profession.
Thank you, Dean Salkin. You never know whether that's an obituary or what, but it was nice. It was nice. So, to the Dean, Congressman King, distinguished faculty, parents, partners, sisters, brothers, friends, and of course, members of the class of 2015. Thank you for inviting me this evening, and I'm pleased to be here. I must say, it's been over 40 years since I graduated from law school, but believe it or not, I actually remember that day almost as if it were yesterday. One of the reasons is because my parents were late. They didn't show up when the thing started, and I thought, you know, it was as much their day as it was mine, so I was fretting that. But they got there in the nick of time, and I was able to share the occasion with them. I mention this because I hope that each of you graduates appreciate that somewhere out there, many in this room, some not in this room, There were people who made a lot of sacrifices for you. There were people who supported you. There were people who accompanied you on this journey. There were people who made it happen for you. And I hope that sometime during the course of the evening, or soon thereafter, you're able to collar them and thank them for what they did, because it's as heroic as what you've done. Now, to the business of the evening. I have been privileged to do several commencements over the course of the years, and in each case, the toughest hurdle is always to say, all right, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say to these folks? Because it's not so easy. It's not hard to kind of come up with a subject, but then when you're told, well, you go, give us 12, 15 minutes, no more, it's not easy to be thoughtful, maybe even profound, to say something useful to graduates, to try and find a little humor, to be memorable, and most importantly, to get it done within the time allotted. And this course was no exception. So I spent the first month that after Patty asked me to do this, thinking about, well, what would I say to this group? And then something serendipitous happened. So I was thinking about it. A friend of mine brought to my attention a book written by a gentleman named Frank Bruni, writes for the New York Times. And the name of the book is Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. I took a look at this book. Now, the reason my friend brought it to my attention is because I'm in the book. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But I took a look at the book and I thought, this is the perfect entree to this evening. The premise of the book is that students and parents in our country are being misled into believing that admission to a top-name college, right? Ivies or one of those top-name schools is the ticket to success in our country. And conversely, not being invited and not attending one of those top-name schools sort of condemns one to success in the second tier only. Now, that belief has obviously led, and I see it all the time in the community in which I live, it's led to just enormous anxiety, concern, stress, gnashing of teeth, particularly by parents who want only the best for their kids. And in New York City, it's permeated down below the college ranks. It's permeated all the way down to these preparatory schools for kindergarten. I mean, just sort of the day schools. If I tell you how many letters of recommendation I have written for 2.5-year-olds, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, what do you say? I've known little Johnny all his life. 2.5 years. Well, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be takes on this notion, and I think does a fairly effective job of obliterating it. The reason I'm in the book, by the way, was I'm like Exhibit A of the kid who made all the wrong choices in terms of where to go to school. As you heard, I went to undergraduate, University of Hawaii, I went to Albany Law School, and still managed, somehow, if my wife were here, she'd explain how, somehow, to make an interesting and hopefully impactful career for myself. So you're probably saying to yourself right now, that's what we're going to talk about, how where you go doesn't determine who you'll be. Wrong. I thought the more interesting question was, if the school, I couldn't agree more with Jason. I mean, you get the sheepskin and you move on. But if the school doesn't determine, kind of what the iron-bound course of your career is going to be, whether you're going to be successful or not. If it's not the schools you went to, what is it, right? What is it that is the determinator of your success? Now, that's not a question that actually anyone can answer, and certainly not in 12 or 15 minutes. There are just too many ingredients, too many variables, too much time elapsed and too much difference between all of us as individuals for anyone to actually give you a cogent answer to that. I get asked that question a lot. It's always in the form of, and it's usually when talking to high school kids, they say, well, what's the key to success? Or what do I have to do to be successful like you? Well, you can't really answer that in any thoughtful and comprehensive way. However, it would be approaching cruel to actually throw the question up there and then not take a shot at it, right? So I'm going to take a shot at it. And I'm going to tell you a story. When I was 16 years old, I was headed off to the University of Hawaii. Now, I didn't know a soul who lived west of the Hudson River. Not a soul. In fact, just to give you a sense of where I came from, my mother, when I told her about the University of Hawaii, she said, "Can't you pick a school in the United States?" Hawaii had been a state for 5 years at that point in time. In any event, so she was not the one to whom I could confess my misgivings, but I was with my grandmother, who always, always, always said, just the greatest concern and regard for me, her oldest grandson. I admitted to a little bit of nervousness and even frightenedness about heading off to Hawaii. And she looked at me, and as she did, she patted me on the lap, and she said, "Don't worry, son." She said, "You just be the person everybody else roots for, that everybody else wants to see succeed, and you'll be fine." So, her advice, be the person everyone else wants to see succeed. If I were to tell you what I think, at least, is the biggest single factor in what limited success I've had, it would be my grandmother's advice. Being the person that other people wanted to see succeed. That other people, because they want to see you succeed, they help you succeed. We live in a world now that is enormously complex, highly interconnected, totally global, and I submit to you, almost no one gets anything done in this world by himself or herself. We all need to rely on others. My friend, the former mayor of New York, David Dinkins, used to have an expression, he used it all the time. We all stand on the shoulders of someone else. Not only was that true then, it's true now. It's truer now than it ever was. And the reality is that the more people that you can persuade in your group, or who you're working with, it doesn't matter whether it's your colleagues, it's people who are working for you, it's people that you just encounter on a chance meeting. The more people that you can get who are prepared to lend a shoulder for you to stand on, the more success you're going to have in this life. So, nothing ever illustrates a principle or a maxim like that like an example. So I could give you 1,000 that have happened to me in my life, where because someone else or some group has sort of decided that, all right, that kid deserves our help. We want to see him succeed. I could tell you 1,000 times when that's happened to me. But I'm going to give you one example. An example I think that actually beautifully illustrates the point. And it goes to about a little over a dozen years ago. You heard I was the CEO of Time Warner, what was then called AOL Time Warner. And I was spending an awful lot of time in Washington because we were being run down by a combination of federal agencies, including the SEC, the Justice Department. We had every attorney general in the United States after us, a bunch of shareholders. And the main thrust of these assaults was that prior to our merger, AOL had engaged in some questionable accounting practices that resulted in the collapse of the value of that company and therefore our now merged company, and cost people a lot of money. But with the SEC, it was almost personal. They actually wanted to put AOL out of business. And as the CEO of now the combined company, I sort of inherited this mess. And I spent, as I say, quite a bit of time down in Washington being deposed as to what happened, how we fixed it, what's going to happen going forward, what should we do. Well, I got down to the examination room in Washington one day rather early, even before my own attorney, and I was sitting in the room reading a newspaper when a young man walked in. It was a young man I hadn't seen before, and he introduced himself. He was a young staff attorney for the SEC, and he had been told that these proceedings that were going on in the examination were both instructional and, he said, quite entertaining. So I chuckled and I said, well, they may be instructional, but they're not entertaining to me. I got too much at stake here to be amused by this. And then miraculously, remarkably, unaccountably, he looked at me. He's eating an apple. I'll never forget this. He looked at me, he said, so you don't have anything to worry about, really. He said, everybody here likes you and they want you to succeed. True story, true story. Well, we dragged on for another 8 months. We ultimately settled the matter. We paid a fine. We got our hands slapped. The SEC did its job, but it was clear in the structuring of all that they had done an about-face. They wanted this company to survive, and they wanted us to succeed. And I think, obviously, you have to have, when you're negotiating anything like that, you have to have skills. That's what you guys have just spent the last 3 years acquiring here at Touro Law School, real skills. And you can't be a bad guy, right? You can't have intentionally flouted the law. You can't have violated the law. Our case was really an iffy case. You can't have intentionally defrauded people. So you have to be somewhere out of the zone of clearly bad. But when you're in the zone of this could go either way, we could come down on you and make an example of you, or we can fix this up and set you right and set you back out into the competitive stream. It helps, believe me, to have people want to be on your side. It helps to have people want to be in the camp that wants to see you succeed. And as I said, as I've thought back on my career, there have been so many of them, and they have been so helpful to me in so many different ways that I cannot tell you how important it's been to my career. And I think that would be applicable to all of you. So now the next question is, well, what does it take, right, to be the person that others want to see succeed? Well, I hate to tell you this, but that's the subject of the next commencement. That's a longer topic. But I will give you some hints in the form of keywords, which I know you're all into. The first one would be humility, right? Humility, the absence of arrogance. If I were to identify one thing that those staff attorneys and accountants down at the SEC had against the AOL guys, it was the arrogance. They just couldn't abide it. Second word, honesty, really speaks for itself. Third word, transparency. If you think about it, nobody roots for a phony, right? Nobody. Fourth word, compassion. I would urge you to embrace fairness, justice, and kindness as part of who you are. And lastly, I would say manifest a genuine interest in the well-being of your fellow man. I know that's more than one word, but you'll forgive me. But what it means in simple English is it ain't all about you, right? It's about the people you work with. It's about the people you are serving. It's about the people you live in a community with. It's about all of us. And if you manifest that, people absorb that, they get that, and that tells them something about who you are and how you're focused. But my objective today isn't really to give you a long-winded lecture on, sort of what it takes to be, ultimately a righteous person, or even ultimately to succeed. Rather, My objective is simply to plant in your mind this notion that whatever you do when you leave Touro and head out into the wider world to make your career and your fortune, keep this notion in mind. Keep in mind the notion that my success is going to depend to some extent, and maybe even a large extent, on how the people around me perceive me and whether they want me to succeed or not. If you do that, I guarantee you'll figure out what you need to do to get that kind of reaction, and I guarantee you, secondly, that that will help your odds of being ultimately successful. So, my 10 to 15 minutes is about up. I want to wish all of you sort of good fortune, and to let you know that I personally am hoping for and rooting for the success of each and every one of you. Now you say, but you don't even know us. I know several of you because I had several. The dean brought about a dozen of your colleagues by, and we all had lunch, and I got to get a sense of who it is, who the Touro Law student is. And, you know, you're me, right? Kid from the block. And so I couldn't be more earnest when I say, I hope for each of you to be successful in whatever it is you choose to do. So thank you, and Godspeed.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons, for sharing a little bit about the secret to your successes. And I hope that members of the class of 2015, you listened carefully and took note because you got some very sage advice. Will Rabbi Krupka please join me at the podium, and also Mr. Parsons. Richard Parsons, as an outstanding leader in the legal profession, a consummate advocate for the cause of justice and truth, and as an exceptional role model for our graduates, I am honored to present to you Rabbi Moshe Krupka at this time as a candidate for the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa.
Upon the recommendation of the Touro College Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center, and by virtue of the authority delegated to me by Dr. Alan Kadish, our President and CEO, and by the Board of Trustees of Touro College and University System, and the Board of Regents, it's a lot of people that are involved in this, the Board of Regents of the University of the State of New York, it is indeed my pleasure to confer upon you the degree of Doctors of Law honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, obligations, and immunities appertaining thereto. Congratulations.
At this time, I ask Representative Peter King to come forward. Congressman Peter T. King is serving his 12th term in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 2nd District of New York, covering portions of Nassau and Suffolk counties, including the towns of Hempstead, Oyster Bay, Babylon, and Islip. He is a member of the Homeland Security Committee and chairs the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence. Throughout his time in Washington, he has been a tireless supporter of the war against international terrorism. He is also focused on crucial issues closer to home and in tune with Touro's mission in disaster relief, coastal resiliency, veterans' rights, and aging and longevity law. Following the ravages of Superstorm Sandy, he led the successful fight in Congress to obtain $60 billion in emergency funding for storm victims. He has also fought hard to bring veterans benefits into the 21st century and has received the AARP's Legislative Leadership Award for combating elder abuse and exploitation. Prior to serving in Congress, he served 3 terms as the Comptroller of Nassau County, and before that was a member of the Hempstead Town Council. Before serving in government, Representative King had extensive experience as a practicing attorney and civic leader. Born in Manhattan, the son of a New York City cop, and raised in Queens, he is a lifelong New Yorker and has lived in Nassau County for more than 45 years. He is a graduate of St. Francis College, Brooklyn, and the University of Notre Dame Law School. Newsday called him, quote, a stand-up guy who isn't shy about tangling with the powerful, even those in his own party. King has become a national figure who delivers for the region and his district. We are delighted to recognize Congressman King's lifetime of dedicated service to Long Island, the state, and the nation. I am honored to present to you Rabbi Moshe Krupka at this time as a candidate for the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa, Representative Peter King.
Representative King, it's indeed my pleasure and honor, upon the recommendation of the Touro College Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center, and by virtue of the authority delegated to me by Dr. Alan Kadish, our President and CEO, the Board of Trustees of the Touro College and University System, and the Board of Regents of the University of the State of New York, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, obligations, and immunities appertaining thereto. Congratulations.